In the quiet town of Riverside, Ohio, a 68-year-old grandmother was about to make the most unexpected business decision of her life. What began as a simple offer to help turned into the kind of family confrontation that would shake their small community to its core. When my daughter Jennifer told me to mind my own business, she had no idea I was about to take those words literally, and by the very business she was running into the ground. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. My name is Margaret Johnson, though everyone in Riverside calls me Maggie. At 68, I thought my days of making bold moves were behind me. I'd spent the last 5 years quietly enjoying retirement after selling my successful catering company, Johnson's Fine Events, which I'd built from nothing over 30 years. My late husband Robert and I had worked side by side for decades, turning what started as weekend wedding receptions in our church basement into one of the most respected catering businesses in 3 counties. After Robert passed 2 years ago, I sold the business to a young couple who promised to maintain our standards. The sale left me financially comfortable but emotionally adrift. Without the daily purpose that had defined my adult life, I found myself rattling around my modest 2-story house on Maple Street, wondering what came next for a woman who'd spent her entire career feeding people and making their special occasions memorable. That's when my daughter Jennifer opened Jen's Kitchen. I should have been thrilled. Jennifer had always shown flashes of culinary talent, even as a child. She'd stand on a step stool beside me in our restaurant kitchen, carefully stirring sauces and arranging garnishes with the focused intensity of someone who understood that food was about more than just nutrition. When she announced her plan to open a cafe in downtown Riverside's newly renovated historic district, I felt a surge of maternal pride mixed with professional excitement. The location was perfect, a corner building with large windows that caught the morning sun and enough space for both intimate dining and community gatherings. Jennifer had grand visions of creating a place where locals could enjoy quality food in a warm atmosphere, where business meetings could happen over excellent coffee, and families could celebrate small victories with homemade desserts. But from the moment Jen's Kitchen opened its doors 6 months ago, I could see the problems mounting like storm clouds on a clear day. It wasn't that Jennifer lacked talent or passion. Her food was generally good, though inconsistent. Her heart was absolutely in the right place, and her enthusiasm was infectious. The problem was that running a restaurant required more than good intentions and decent recipes. It demanded systems, cost control, inventory management, staff scheduling, customer service protocols, and a dozen other operational details that Jennifer seemed to approach with more hope than strategy. I watched from a careful distance as my daughter struggled with the realities of restaurant ownership. Orders arrived late or incomplete because she hadn't established reliable supplier relationships. Staff turnover was constant because she hadn't created clear job descriptions or competitive compensation packages. Customer complaints about slow service and cold food became regular occurrences because the kitchen workflow was inefficient and the dining room understaffed. The maternal part of me wanted to rush in and fix everything. The business owner part of me recognized patterns I'd seen destroy other promising ventures. But every time I gently suggested ways to improve operations or offered to share what I'd learned during my own restaurant years, Jennifer would smile politely and change the subject. For months, I respected her independence. This was her dream, her business, her chance to prove herself without her mother's shadow looming over every decision. I understood the need to make her own mistakes and find her own solutions. But understanding didn't make it easier to watch her struggle with problems I could solve in my sleep. The breaking point came on a rainy Thursday in October. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time. So if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. I'd stopped by Jen's Kitchen for lunch, as had become my weekly habit. The dining room was nearly empty despite it being prime lunch hour, and the few customers present looked frustrated by the slow service. Through the kitchen's pass-through window, I could see Jennifer frantically trying to manage both cooking and plating, while her lone server dealt with increasingly impatient diners. When my salad finally arrived, the lettuce was wilted, and the dressing had clearly been sitting under heat lamps too long. At a nearby table, a businessman checked his watch repeatedly while waiting for what should have been a quick sandwich order. Two elderly women at the corner table were engaged in increasingly pointed discussion about whether to leave before their food arrived. My heart broke watching Jennifer emerge from the kitchen, her face flushed with stress and embarrassment, to apologize to customers who were already putting on their coats. This was exactly the kind of downward spiral that killed restaurants. Poor service led to fewer customers, which led to reduced revenue, which led to staff cuts, which led to even poorer service in an accelerating cycle of failure. After the lunch rush finally ended, and the last frustrated customer had left, I approached Jennifer at the counter, where she was staring at the day's receipts with obvious dismay. "Rough day?" I asked gently, settling onto one of the counter stools that wobbled slightly because someone had forgotten to tighten the bolts. Jennifer looked up with tired eyes that reminded me of her father when he was overwhelmed. "Just the usual chaos," she said, attempting a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Restaurant business is tough, you know. Everyone thinks they could do it better until they're actually trying to keep all the plates spinning at once." The comment stung because it felt directed at me, though I tried to give her the benefit of the doubt. "I know you're working incredibly hard," I said carefully. "I've been thinking about some of the operational challenges you're facing, and I might have some suggestions that could help streamline things." Jennifer's expression shifted subtly, a defensive wall rising behind her eyes. "What kind of suggestions?" I chose my words carefully, trying to sound supportive rather than critical. "Well, I noticed your lunch prep seems to happen during service hours, which slows down order fulfillment. And your inventory system might benefit from some reorganization to reduce waste and improve cost control. I also think your staff scheduling could be optimized to better match customer flow patterns." Each suggestion was met with increasing stiffness in Jennifer's posture. When I finished, she was quiet for a long moment, wiping down the already clean counter with sharp, aggressive strokes. "Mom," she said finally, her voice carrying a warning tone I recognized from her teenage years. "I appreciate that you want to help, but this is my business. I need to figure things out my own way." "Of course," I said quickly. "I just thought that since I've been through similar challenges, my experience might save you some time and frustration. You don't have to reinvent every solution when proven methods already exist." That's when Jennifer set down her cleaning cloth and turned to face me fully, her expression a mixture of frustration and something that looked dangerously close to resentment. "That's exactly the problem," she said, her voice rising slightly. "You think because you ran a successful catering business, you automatically know how to fix my restaurant. But this isn't Johnson's Fine Events. This is Jen's kitchen. It's different food, different customers, different everything. I'm not trying to recreate what you built, I'm trying to build something of my own." The words hit harder than I'd expected. I'd thought I was offering helpful guidance, but Jennifer clearly saw it as interference or judgment. "I'm not trying to recreate anything," I said, working to keep my own voice level. "I'm just suggesting practical improvements based on operational principles that work regardless of the specific type of food service." "Operational principles," Jennifer repeated, and there was an edge to her voice now that made other customers glance our way. "You keep talking about systems and protocols and efficiency like this is some kind of corporate consulting project instead of a dream I'm trying to make work with my own two hands." I felt my own frustration rising. This wasn't about corporate consulting or efficiency for its own sake. This was about watching my daughter's dream turn into a nightmare because she was too proud to accept help that could prevent entirely avoidable failures. "Your dream is failing," I said, the words coming out more bluntly than I'd intended. "Customer satisfaction is declining, revenue is dropping, and you're burning through cash at an unsustainable rate. Dreams are wonderful, but they need solid business practices to survive in the real world." The silence that followed was deafening. Jennifer's face went through a series of emotions: shock, hurt, anger, before settling into something cold and final. "You know what, Mom?" she said, her voice now deadly quiet. "Maybe you should just mind your own business and let me worry about mine." The phrase hung in the air between us like a slap. Mind my own business. As if watching my daughter struggle wasn't my business. As if her success and happiness weren't fundamentally connected to my own well-being as her mother. As if the years I'd spent building expertise in this exact industry somehow disqualified me from caring about her venture's survival. "Fine," I said, standing up from the wobbling stool and reaching for my purse. "I'll mind my own business." But as I walked out of Jen's kitchen into the October drizzle, my mind was already spinning with possibilities that Jennifer couldn't have imagined. She wanted me to mind my own business? Well, what if her business became my business? What if instead of offering unwanted advice from the sidelines, I found a way to implement necessary changes from a position of actual authority? The idea was audacious, probably crazy, and definitely the kind of thing that would cause a family explosion. But as I drove home through Riverside's quiet streets, passing the bank where I maintained substantial assets from my business sale and the real estate office where I'd maintained connections from years of commercial dealings, the crazy idea began to feel less crazy and more like the most logical solution to an impossible situation. That evening, I sat in my kitchen with a cup of tea and a legal pad, making lists the way Robert and I used to do when we were planning major business decisions. On one side, I wrote down everything I knew about Jen's kitchen's financial situation, which was more than Jennifer realized. Riverside was a small town, and word traveled quickly through the business community about restaurants struggling to pay suppliers or missing rent payments. On the other side, I wrote down my own resources and capabilities. The sale of Johnson's Fine Events had left me with significant liquid assets, far more than I needed for my simple retirement lifestyle. I had 3 decades of restaurant industry experience, an extensive network of suppliers and vendors, and most importantly, I understood exactly what needed to be done to turn around a failing food service operation. In the middle of the page, I wrote the question that would determine everything. What would happen if I bought Jen's kitchen? The more I considered it, the more sense it made. Jennifer was clearly in over her head financially. Her pride was preventing her from accepting the help she desperately needed. But if I owned the business, I wouldn't be offering unwanted advice. I'd be making necessary operational decisions as the owner. Jennifer could continue as the chef and public face of the restaurant, while I handled the business side that was currently overwhelming her. Of course, the family dynamics would be explosive. Jennifer would see it as the ultimate interference, a hostile takeover of her independence. Michael, my son-in-law, would probably support whatever Jennifer decided, which meant I'd be facing unified opposition from my daughter's household. My grandchildren, Emma and Tyler, might not understand why Grandma was fighting with their mother over a restaurant. But the alternative was watching Jennifer's dream slowly die while our relationship deteriorated under the weight of her pride and my frustrated desire to help. At least this way, the restaurant might survive, and eventually, Jennifer might understand that sometimes love required taking actions that seemed harsh in the moment but preserved something valuable for the future. I spent 3 more days researching the situation before making any moves. I drove past Jen's kitchen during different times of day, noting customer traffic patterns and observing operational inefficiencies. I spoke casually with other downtown business owners, gathering intelligence about foot traffic, local market conditions, and Jennifer's reputation among the merchant community. What I learned was both encouraging and alarming. The location was excellent, with high visibility and convenient parking. The local market definitely supported another quality dining option, especially one that filled the gap between fast food and formal restaurant dining. Several business owners mentioned that they'd hoped Jen's kitchen would become their go-to spot for client lunches and casual meetings. But I also learned that Jennifer's reputation was sliding. Late deliveries, inconsistent food quality, and poor customer service were becoming the restaurant's defining characteristics among local diners. 2 other restaurant owners mentioned that they'd been approached by suppliers seeking payment for overdue accounts from Jen's kitchen. The landlord of Jennifer's building, whom I knew from Chamber of Commerce functions, made pointed comments about tenants who struggled with punctual rent payments. The picture that emerged was of a business with excellent potential being destroyed by operational mismanagement and financial naivety. It was exactly the kind of situation I'd seen dozens of times during my own career, and I knew from experience that it would only get worse without immediate, dramatic intervention. On the 4th day, I made the call that would change everything. Peterson Commercial Real Estate. This is David Chen speaking. David Chen had been my commercial real estate agent when I'd been looking for locations to expand Johnson's fine events years earlier. He was thorough, discreet, and had excellent relationships throughout Riverside's business community. David, this is Maggie Johnson. I hope you remember me. Of course, Mrs. Johnson. How are you enjoying retirement? I heard you sold the catering business. I hope you're finding ways to stay busy. Actually, that's why I'm calling. I'm interested in acquiring a restaurant property, and I need someone who can handle the transaction with absolute discretion. There was a pause. Are you looking to get back into the food service industry? I thought you were done with the restaurant business. Let's just say I've discovered that retirement isn't as fulfilling as I'd hoped. I'm interested in Jen's Kitchen on Main Street. Can you find out if the owner might be interested in selling? Another pause. Longer this time. Mrs. Johnson, isn't that your daughter's restaurant? It is. Which is why I need someone who can approach this professionally and confidentially. Can you handle that for me? David's voice became carefully neutral. Of course. I'll make some discreet inquiries and get back to you within 48 hours. As I hung up the phone, I felt a mixture of excitement and terror. I was either about to save my daughter's dream or destroy our relationship permanently. Possibly both. But after watching Jennifer struggle for months while refusing help, I was convinced that dramatic action was the only way to prevent inevitable failure. The next morning brought an unexpected development. Jennifer called, her voice tight with stress but lacking the angry edge from our previous conversation. Mom, I was wondering if you might have time for coffee this afternoon. I've been thinking about what you said, and maybe we could talk about some of those operational suggestions you mentioned. My heart leaped. Was Jennifer finally ready to accept help? Had she realized that pride was a luxury she couldn't afford when her business was failing? Of course, I said immediately. Should I come to the restaurant? Actually, could we meet somewhere else? Maybe Starbucks on 5th Street? I'd rather talk privately. When I arrived at the coffee shop that afternoon, Jennifer was already waiting in a corner booth, 2 cups of coffee cooling on the table between her hands. She looked exhausted, with dark circles under her eyes and the kind of defeated posture that came from too many sleepless nights spent worrying about problems with no apparent solutions. Thanks for coming, she said as I slid into the booth across from her. I owe you an apology for the other day. I was stressed and took it out on you, which wasn't fair. You don't need to apologize, I said gently. Running a restaurant is incredibly difficult, and I know you're under enormous pressure. Jennifer nodded, staring into her coffee cup. The pressure is getting worse every day. I can't keep up with the expenses, the customer complaints are increasing, and I'm starting to think I was naive about how hard this would be. This was exactly what I'd hoped to hear, Jennifer acknowledging the reality of her situation and potentially opening the door to meaningful help. But before I could respond, she continued, which is why I've decided to close the restaurant. The words hit me like a physical blow. Close it? Jennifer, you don't have to close it. With some operational changes and maybe additional capital investment, Jen's Kitchen could absolutely succeed. Mom, I've been losing money every month since I opened. My savings are almost gone, and I can't afford to keep subsidizing a failing business. Michael thinks I should cut my losses before things get worse. But you're so close to turning it around, I insisted. The location is perfect, the concept is solid, you just need better systems and maybe some experienced guidance to work through the initial challenges. Jennifer looked up at me with tired eyes. That's what I wanted to talk to you about. When you offered to share your experience the other day, I got defensive because I felt like you were criticizing everything I'd built. But maybe criticism is what I need to hear right now. This was my opening, the chance to help that I'd been hoping for since Jennifer first opened the restaurant. But even as I started to respond, my phone buzzed with a text message from David Chen. Owner appears interested in selling. When would you like to discuss terms? I stared at the message, my mind reeling. Jennifer was finally ready to accept help, but I'd already set in motion a plan that would make me her boss instead of her advisor. If I revealed the purchase negotiations now, she'd see it as the ultimate betrayal, proof that I'd been plotting behind her back instead of trusting her to make her own decisions. But if I didn't reveal it, and the sale went through, the shock would be even worse. Jennifer would discover that I'd bought her business while she was opening up to me about her struggles and her willingness to accept guidance. "Mom, are you okay? You look like you've seen a ghost." I quickly put the phone away, my mind racing through the implications of the choice I had to make right now. Tell Jennifer about the potential purchase and risk losing both the opportunity to save the restaurant and any chance of her accepting my help voluntarily. Or proceed with the purchase and deal with the family explosion when she discovered what I'd done. "I'm fine," I said, forcing a smile. "Just thinking about what you've said. Jennifer, before you make any final decisions about closing, would you be willing to let me help with a comprehensive business analysis? Maybe we could spend a week going through your operations together, identifying specific problems and solutions." Jennifer's expression brightened slightly. "You'd be willing to do that? Even after I told you to mind your own business?" "Especially after that," I said. "Sometimes the people we love most are the hardest to help, because we're so afraid of interfering that we don't intervene when intervention is desperately needed." We spent the next hour discussing the restaurant's challenges in detail. Jennifer was surprisingly candid about the financial pressures, the operational inefficiencies, and her own inexperience with restaurant management. For the first time since she'd opened Jen's Kitchen, she seemed genuinely receptive to guidance and willing to acknowledge that good intentions weren't sufficient for business success. As we talked, I felt increasingly conflicted about the purchase negotiations. Jennifer was finally opening up to me, finally ready to work together on solutions. Maybe buying the restaurant wasn't necessary after all. Maybe this conversation represented the breakthrough I'd been hoping for. But I also knew Jennifer well enough to recognize her patterns. She was opening up now because she was scared and desperate, but would that receptiveness last once the immediate crisis passed? Would she continue accepting guidance if it meant admitting that her mother's expertise was essential for her success? Or would her pride reassert itself once the restaurant stabilized, leading to the same conflicts we'd been having for months? By the time we parted ways, I'd promised to spend the following week conducting a thorough operational review of Jen's Kitchen. Jennifer seemed genuinely grateful and relieved to have help, and I allowed myself to hope that maybe we could work together to save her dream without the dramatic intervention I'd been planning. But that evening, as I sat in my kitchen reviewing the financial information Jennifer had shared, the harsh reality became undeniable. The restaurant was in worse shape than I'd realized. Even with perfect operational improvements, Jen's Kitchen would need substantial capital injection to survive the next 3 months. Jennifer didn't have that capital, and based on her credit situation, she wouldn't be able to obtain financing from traditional sources, which meant that whether she liked it or not, her dream was going to die unless someone with resources stepped in to save it. And the only person with both the resources and the expertise to turn things around was me. At 10:47 p.m., I sent a text message to David Chen. "Please proceed with the acquisition negotiations. I want to close as quickly as possible." The die was cast. In a few days, I would own my daughter's restaurant, and our relationship would never be the same. But maybe, eventually, she would understand that sometimes loving someone meant making decisions they couldn't make themselves, even when those decisions felt like betrayal in the moment. Sometimes being a good mother meant being willing to be seen as a terrible mother, if that's what it took to save what mattered most. The news arrived 3 days later in a phone call that would change everything. David Chen's voice carried the satisfaction of a deal well done when he called Thursday morning while I was tending to my small herb garden behind the house. "Mrs. Johnson, I have excellent news. The owner of Jen's Kitchen is definitely interested in selling. In fact, she seems quite motivated to move quickly. We could potentially close within 2 weeks if you're prepared to proceed." My hands trembled slightly as I set down my watering can. What kind of terms is she looking for? She's asking $180,000 for the business, equipment, and assumption of the lease. That includes all kitchen equipment, furniture, the point-of-sale system, and about $8,000 in current inventory. Honestly, it's a fair price considering the location and the investment she's made in renovations. The amount was well within my budget, but hearing it made the transaction feel suddenly real and irreversible. In 2 weeks, I could own the restaurant that my daughter had poured her heart and savings into building. The thought was both thrilling and terrifying. "There's one more thing," David continued. She mentioned that she'd prefer if the buyer had restaurant experience and would be willing to retain some of the current staff. She seems genuinely concerned about the employees who've been loyal to her during the difficult months. Even in her desperation to sell, Jennifer was thinking about other people's welfare. The knowledge both warmed my heart and reinforced my conviction that she deserved better than watching her dream collapse due to inexperience and undercapitalization. "I can definitely meet those requirements," I said. "Please let her know that I'm very serious about maintaining the restaurant's community role and taking care of the staff." After hanging up with David, I stood in my garden feeling the weight of what I was about to do. In less than 2 weeks, I would be the owner of Jen's Kitchen, and Jennifer would discover that her buyer was her own mother. The explosion would be nuclear, but maybe afterward we could rebuild something stronger from the wreckage. That afternoon brought an unexpected encounter that would prove crucial to everything that followed. I was leaving the bank after discussing financing options with my longtime banker when I quite literally bumped into Marcus Rivera outside the grocery store. Marcus owned Rivera's Auto Repair, a successful family business that had been serving Riverside for over 20 years. We'd worked together several times when his shop had needed catering for customer appreciation events. "Maggie, how are you enjoying retirement?" Marcus asked, studying the grocery bags that had nearly scattered when we collided. "I'm discovering that retirement might be overrated," I said with a laugh. "How's business treating you?" "Can't complain. Though I have to say, I miss having Johnson's Fine Events handle our company functions. The new owners just don't have your attention to detail." We chatted for a few minutes about mutual acquaintances and local business developments. Then Marcus mentioned something that stopped me in my tracks. "I've been hoping Jen's Kitchen would become my go-to spot for client lunches, but they're having some real operational issues. Last week I took a potential customer there, and we waited 45 minutes for sandwiches. The food was good when it finally arrived, but that kind of service makes me look bad in front of clients." "That's unfortunate," I said carefully. "Have you tried talking to Jennifer about it?" Marcus's expression grew sympathetic. "I know she's your daughter, Maggie, and I don't want to criticize family. But honestly, she seems overwhelmed. The place has so much potential, but potential doesn't pay the bills. I've been taking my business meetings to that new place over in Millfield instead." This was exactly what I'd feared. Jennifer's operational problems weren't just abstract concerns. They were actively driving away the local business customers who could have provided steady revenue and positive word-of-mouth marketing. Each disappointed customer like Marcus represented dozens of potential future visits that would never happen. "What would it take to win back your business?" I asked. "Consistent service and reliable timing," Marcus said without hesitation. "I don't need gourmet food for business lunches, but I need to know that when I make a reservation for 12:30, my clients and I will be eating by 1 o'clock. Reputation matters in my business, and I can't afford to look disorganized because my restaurant choice dropped the ball." After we parted ways, I drove through downtown Riverside with new eyes, trying to see Jen's Kitchen from the perspective of business owners like Marcus. The location truly was perfect, visible from the main street, walking distance from several office buildings, with convenient parking for quick lunches and casual meetings. But location meant nothing if the service couldn't support the convenience. That evening, I decided to conduct my own reconnaissance mission. Instead of visiting Jen's Kitchen as Jennifer's mother, I would observe as an anonymous customer during their dinner rush. I borrowed my neighbor's car, wore a baseball cap and sunglasses, and arrived at the restaurant at 6:30 p.m., when the dinner crowd should have been at its peak. What I saw broke my heart and confirmed my worst fears. The dining room was barely half full on what should have been one of the busiest nights of the week. The customers who were present looked frustrated and restless. I could see Jennifer through the kitchen pass through, moving frantically between multiple tasks, while her single server juggled too many tables with obvious stress. I ordered a simple chicken sandwich and watched the operation unfold with the practiced eye of someone who'd managed restaurant service for 3 decades. The problems were glaring and entirely preventable. Orders were being taken faster than the kitchen could prepare them, creating a backup that made every subsequent order later. The server was trying to handle both food service and drink refills, meaning that customers went long periods without attention. Most critically, there was no system for managing the flow of orders during busy periods. My sandwich took 38 minutes to arrive, and when it finally reached my table, the chicken was overcooked and the bread was soggy from sitting too long under heat lamps. At the table next to me, a young couple was having an increasingly heated discussion about whether to leave before their appetizers arrived. Near the window, an elderly man was repeatedly checking his watch, while his dinner companion looked embarrassed about the delay. But what broke my heart most was watching Jennifer emerge from the kitchen to apologize to disappointed customers. I could see the stress and exhaustion in every line of her body, the way her hands shook slightly as she tried to explain delays she clearly couldn't control. This was my accomplished, talented daughter, reduced to making excuses for problems she didn't know how to solve. When I finally left the restaurant, I had eaten one of the worst meals of my adult life in a business that had every advantage except competent management. The tragedy wasn't that Jennifer lacked talent or dedication, it was that she was drowning in operational details that I could have helped her master in a week. The next morning brought a phone call that crystallized everything I'd been thinking. "Mom, it's Jennifer. Do you have a few minutes to talk?" Her voice carried a brittleness that immediately worried me. "Of course. What's wrong?" "I had a terrible night at the restaurant yesterday. We had our biggest dinner crowd in weeks, and everything went wrong. Orders got backed up, customers complained, and one table actually walked out without paying because they'd been waiting so long. I ended up comping 3 meals and still got bad reviews posted online before midnight." I closed my eyes, remembering the chaos I'd witnessed firsthand. "I'm sorry." "That sounds incredibly stressful. The worst part is that I knew it was happening, but I couldn't figure out how to fix it while it was going on. By the time I realized we were in trouble, it was too late to recover. I felt so helpless and incompetent. This was my opening, the chance to offer concrete help based on what I'd observed. "Jennifer, these kinds of service breakdowns are completely preventable with proper systems. If you'd like, I could help you develop protocols for managing busy periods." But instead of the gratitude I'd hoped for, Jennifer's response carried a familiar defensive edge. "I don't think systems are the problem, Mom. I think the problem is that I'm trying to do too much myself. Maybe I need to hire more staff." "More staff won't solve service flow problems," I said gently. "In fact, adding people without proper systems often makes things worse, because there's no coordination. What I need," Jennifer interrupted, her voice rising slightly, "is to figure this out myself. I can't keep running to my mother every time something goes wrong. That's not how successful business owners operate." The conversation continued for another 10 minutes, but the pattern was established. Jennifer would describe problems that I'd solved dozens of times in my own restaurant career. I would offer specific solutions based on proven methods, and she would deflect my suggestions while insisting she needed to find her own way. By the time we hung up, I was more convinced than ever that direct guidance wasn't going to work. Jennifer's pride was preventing her from accepting help that could save her business, and her inexperience was preventing her from developing solutions quickly enough to avoid failure. But the conversation had also revealed something else. Jennifer was starting to crack under the pressure. The confident enthusiasm she'd shown when opening Jen's kitchen was being replaced by stress, self-doubt, and the kind of exhaustion that came from fighting battles she wasn't equipped to win. That afternoon, I drove to the outskirts of Riverside to visit someone who might offer a different perspective on my dilemma. Patricia Williams had been my accountant for 20 years and had become a trusted friend during my business career. More importantly, she had teenage daughters and understood the delicate balance between helping children and enabling dependence. Patricia's office occupied the first floor of a converted Victorian house, and she greeted me with the warm smile that had made our professional relationship feel personal from the beginning. "Maggie, what brings you here? Please tell me you're not thinking about starting another business and putting me back to work managing your books." "Actually," I said, settling into the comfortable chair across from her desk, "I am thinking about acquiring a business. But it's complicated." Over the next hour, I laid out the entire situation for Patricia: Jennifer's struggling restaurant, her refusal to accept guidance, my plan to purchase the business, and my fears about the family consequences of such a dramatic intervention. Patricia listened without judgment, taking occasional notes and asking clarifying questions. When I finished, she was quiet for several minutes, clearly processing the complex family and business dynamics I'd described. "Let me make sure I understand," she said finally. "Jennifer is running a restaurant into the ground, despite having access to expert guidance from someone who built a successful food service business over 30 years. She's too proud to accept help, too inexperienced to solve the problems herself, and heading toward financial disaster that will destroy her savings and possibly her marriage." "That's an accurate summary," I admitted. "And your solution is to buy the business out from under her, which will give you operational control but will also probably make her feel betrayed and manipulated. I'm hoping she'll eventually understand that I was trying to save something she couldn't save herself." Patricia leaned back in her chair, studying me with the expression she wore when reviewing particularly complex financial situations. "Maggie, I've known you long enough to understand your motivations. You're not doing this to control Jennifer or prove a point. You're doing this because you can't stand watching her fail when you know how to help her succeed." "Exactly. But I'm also terrified that I'm about to destroy our relationship permanently." "That's possible," Patricia said bluntly. "But what's the alternative? Watching Jennifer lose everything, while maintaining the fiction that she can solve complex business problems through trial and error? Sometimes love requires making decisions that feel harsh in the moment, but preserve something important for the future." Patricia's words echoed my own reasoning, but hearing them from someone else made them feel more solid and defensible. This wasn't just a mother's interference. It was a business intervention based on genuine expertise and legitimate concern. "There's another factor to consider," Patricia continued. "If Jennifer's business fails, she won't just lose her investment. She'll lose her confidence in her own abilities, probably her marriage will suffer under the financial stress, and she'll spend years questioning whether she's capable of achieving her dreams. But if the business succeeds under your ownership, she might learn the skills she needs to eventually take back control." "You think there's a chance she could eventually understand what I'm trying to do?" "I think there's a chance you could structure this in a way that protects both the business and your relationship. What if you bought the restaurant but offered Jennifer a path to buy it back once she's demonstrated the management skills necessary for success?" The suggestion hit me like lightning. Instead of simply taking over Jennifer's business, I could create a situation where she had the opportunity to earn it back by proving she'd learned what she needed to know. It would still require the same initial purchase and the same family confrontation, but it would offer hope for eventual reconciliation and shared success. "How would that work practically?" I asked. Patricia pulled out a legal pad and began sketching organizational structures. "You buy the business and become the managing partner. Jennifer stays on as head chef and learns restaurant management by working directly with you. After she's demonstrated competency in operations, finance, and customer service, say after 2 years, you offer her the option to buy back a controlling interest at fair market value." The more we discussed it, the more viable the plan seemed. Jennifer would keep her role as the creative force behind the restaurant, while learning the business skills she currently lacked. I would handle the operational and financial aspects that were currently overwhelming her, and eventually, if she proved herself capable, she could regain ownership of a successful business instead of losing control of a failing one. "It's still going to be explosive when she finds out," I warned. "Probably," Patricia agreed, "but explosions sometimes clear the air. And if you approach this as a business partnership with defined roles and expectations, rather than a maternal takeover, Jennifer might eventually see it as an opportunity rather than a betrayal." That evening, I called David Chen and asked him to modify the purchase negotiations. Instead of a simple acquisition, I wanted to structure the deal as a management buyout with Jennifer retaining a minority stake and a path to majority ownership based on performance metrics. "That's more complex," David warned. "But it shows good faith and might make the transition easier for all parties involved." By the end of the week, the basic terms were negotiated. I would purchase 75% ownership of Jen's Kitchen for $135,000, Jennifer would retain 25% ownership, and she would have the option to buy back majority control after meeting specific business performance targets over 2 years. The arrangement protected my investment while giving Jennifer a realistic path to regaining full control of her dream. The paperwork was scheduled to be finalized the following Tuesday, which meant I had 4 days to figure out how to tell my daughter that I was about to become her business partner, whether she liked it or not. The weekend passed in a blur of second-guessing and preparation. I spent Saturday developing a comprehensive business plan for turning around Jen's Kitchen's operations, focusing on the immediate changes that would be necessary to stop the hemorrhaging of customers and revenue. Sunday was devoted to researching successful restaurant partnerships, looking for models that might guide our new working relationship. But mostly, I spent the weekend rehearsing different versions of the conversation that would change everything between Jennifer and me. How do you tell your adult daughter that you've been negotiating to buy her failing business behind her back? How do you explain that love sometimes requires actions that feel like betrayal? How do you convince someone that losing control might be the only way to save what they care about most? Monday morning brought an unexpected complication. Jennifer called while I was reviewing the final purchase documents, her voice carrying an excitement I hadn't heard in months. "Mom, I think I figured out what's been going wrong with the dinner service. I stayed late last night and reorganized the entire kitchen workflow. I think if I prep more components in advance and create a better system for tracking orders, I can cut service times in half." My heart sank. Jennifer was finally implementing exactly the kind of operational improvements I'd been suggesting for months, but she was doing it 24 hours before I was scheduled to buy her restaurant. If her new system worked, she might not need to sell. But if it didn't, tomorrow's dinner service could be the disaster that finally convinced her to accept my help. "That sounds promising," I said carefully. "Are you planning to test the new system tonight?" "Actually, I was wondering if you'd like to come for dinner around 7 o'clock. Not as my mother offering advice, but as a customer who understands restaurant operations. I'd value your honest assessment of whether the changes are working." The irony was almost unbearable. Jennifer was finally asking for the kind of objective feedback I'd been wanting to provide for months, but she was asking for it on the eve of a transaction that would make such feedback irrelevant. "I'd be happy to come," I said. "Should I make a reservation?" "No need. I'll make sure you get a good table and fast service. This is my chance to prove that I can make this work." As I hung up the phone, I realized that tonight's dinner would determine more than just the success of Jennifer's operational improvements. It would determine whether I proceeded with the purchase or called off the entire plan. If Jennifer had finally figured out how to manage her restaurant effectively, buying it would be unnecessary and destructive. But if tonight was another disaster, the purchase might be the only way to prevent total failure. Either way, by tomorrow evening, everything between my daughter and me would be different. The only question was whether we'd end up as business partners or as family members who could no longer talk to each other about the thing that mattered most to both of us. I spent the rest of Monday in a state of nervous anticipation, alternately hoping that Jennifer would prove she'd solved her problems and dreading the possibility that she hadn't. By 6:30 p.m., when I left for Jen's Kitchen, I still didn't know whether I was going to dinner as a supportive mother or as a future business owner conducting her final assessment of an acquisition target. The restaurant looked different as I approached it that evening. Jennifer had added small touches. Fresh flowers on each table, soft lighting that made the dining room feel warmer, and a handwritten menu board that showcased daily specials. For the first time in months, Jen's Kitchen looked like a place where people might want to spend an evening rather than grab a quick meal. But looks, as I knew from 3 decades in the restaurant business, were only the beginning. The real test would be whether Jennifer had finally mastered the operational complexities that had been defeating her since opening day. The evening at Jen's Kitchen unfolded like a slow-motion catastrophe despite Jennifer's best intentions. I arrived at exactly 7 o'clock to find the dining room busier than I'd seen it in weeks, which should have been encouraging but instead filled me with dread. More customers meant more opportunities for the operational breakdowns that had been plaguing the restaurant for months. Jennifer seated me personally at a corner table with a nervous smile that reminded me of her high school theater performances when she was trying too hard to project confidence. "I've got everything under control tonight, Mom. You're going to see a completely different restaurant." The first warning sign came within minutes. I could hear raised voices from the kitchen as Jennifer discovered that her prep work hadn't accounted for the unexpectedly large crowd. Through the pass-through window, I watched her frantically trying to prepare components that should have been ready hours earlier, while simultaneously managing multiple orders that were already behind schedule. The couple at the table next to me ordered appetizers that took 43 minutes to arrive. When the food finally reached their table, the spinach dip was lukewarm, and the bread was stale. They ate in disappointed silence, checking their phones repeatedly, and avoiding eye contact with their increasingly frazzled server. My own meal was a disaster of epic proportions. The salmon I ordered arrived overcooked and dry, accompanied by vegetables that had clearly been sitting under heat lamps for far too long. When I gently mentioned to the server that the fish seemed overdone, she disappeared for 15 minutes before returning with an apology and the news that the kitchen was too backed up to prepare a replacement. But the breaking point came when I witnessed Jennifer have a complete meltdown in full view of the dining room. A table of business associates had been waiting over an hour for their entrees, when one of them finally stood up and demanded to speak with the manager. Jennifer emerged from the kitchen with sauce stains on her apron and exhaustion written across every feature. "I'm so sorry for the delay," she said, her voice shaking with stress and embarrassment. "We're experiencing some kitchen difficulties, but your food should be ready in just a few more minutes." "We've been here for an hour and 20 minutes," the businessman replied, his voice loud enough to draw stares from other diners. "This is completely unacceptable. We have appointments to keep, and this kind of service is exactly why local businesses fail." Jennifer's face crumpled visibly. "Please, just give us 5 more minutes. I know we can get your order out." 5 minutes? You said that 30 minutes ago. We're leaving, and we won't be back. Neither will anyone we know. As the business group stormed out, leaving their unpaid check behind, Jennifer stood frozen in the middle of the dining room, while the remaining customers whispered among themselves, and several more tables began gathering their belongings to leave. It was the kind of public humiliation that could destroy a restaurant's reputation permanently, and I could see in Jennifer's face that she knew it. That night, after the last disappointed customer had left and Jennifer had locked the doors of her empty restaurant, I made the call that would change everything. "David, it's Maggie Johnson. I want to proceed with the purchase immediately. Can we accelerate the closing to tomorrow afternoon?" "Tomorrow afternoon? That's quite a rush, Mrs. Johnson. Is everything all right?" I looked across the street at Jen's kitchen, where Jennifer was still inside, cleaning up the wreckage of her worst service night ever. Through the window I could see her sitting at one of the tables with her head in her hands, the picture of defeat and despair. "Everything is exactly as I expected it would be," I said. "Jennifer needs help whether she wants it or not, and waiting another week won't make this conversation any easier. I can arrange for an afternoon closing if you're certain." The seller seems quite motivated to finalize the transaction. By Wednesday morning I owned 75% of my daughter's restaurant. The paperwork was signed, the money transferred, and the legal reality established. Jennifer Parker no longer had sole control over Jen's kitchen. But she didn't know it yet. I spent Wednesday afternoon developing what I thought of as my intervention strategy. This wasn't going to be a hostile takeover or a maternal lecture about business management. This was going to be a professional conversation between business partners about the immediate changes necessary to save a failing enterprise. I prepared a comprehensive operational plan, covering everything from kitchen workflow optimization to staff scheduling protocols. I researched local suppliers who could provide better pricing and more reliable delivery schedules. I developed customer service standards and quality control measures that would prevent the kind of disasters I'd witnessed throughout Jennifer's tenure as owner. Most importantly, I prepared talking points that emphasized partnership rather than displacement. Jennifer would retain creative control over the menu and continue as head chef. I would handle the business operations that had been overwhelming her. Together, we could build something successful that neither of us could achieve alone. Of course, I also prepared for the explosion that would inevitably follow my revelation. Jennifer was going to feel betrayed, manipulated, and angry. She would probably accuse me of undermining her independence and destroying her dream. The conversation would be ugly, possibly relationship-ending, but necessary if we were going to move forward productively. Thursday morning brought an unexpected complication. Jennifer called while I was reviewing supplier contracts, her voice carrying a brittle cheerfulness that immediately worried me. Mom, I wanted to let you know that I've decided to accept an offer to sell the restaurant. A local investor approached me yesterday and made a very generous proposal. I should have the sale finalized within a week. My blood ran cold. A local investor? Who? Someone with restaurant experience who thinks they can turn things around. Honestly, I'm relieved. Tuesday night made it clear that I'm in over my head, and maybe it's time to admit that some dreams aren't meant to come true. The irony was staggering. Jennifer was telling me about selling her restaurant to a mysterious investor, who was actually me, while I sat looking at ownership documents that proved the sale had already been completed. She had no idea that her local investor was her own mother, or that the conversation we were having was built on a foundation of secrets that would soon explode into the open. Jennifer, I said carefully, before you finalize anything, I think we should talk. Could you come over this afternoon? Actually, I was planning to spend the day at the restaurant doing inventory for the new owner. But we could talk tomorrow if it's important. It's very important. Could you come by around 2 o'clock? After hanging up, I sat in my kitchen staring at the legal documents that made me Jennifer's business partner without her knowledge. In 4 hours, I would have to tell my daughter that I was the mysterious investor she was so relieved to be selling to. The conversation would either mark the beginning of a new chapter in our relationship or the end of any relationship at all. I spent the morning alternately rehearsing different versions of the revelation and second-guessing my decision to proceed with the purchase. Maybe I should have trusted Jennifer to find her own solutions. Maybe I should have respected her independence even if it meant watching her fail. Maybe maternal love required accepting your child's choices even when those choices led to disaster. But then I thought about Tuesday night's meltdown, about the customers walking out in disgust, about Jennifer's face when she realized she'd humiliated herself in front of the entire dining room. Sometimes love required intervention, even when intervention felt like betrayal. At exactly 2 o'clock, Jennifer arrived at my house looking more composed than she had in weeks. The relief of knowing she would soon be free from the restaurant's operational nightmares had clearly lifted an enormous weight from her shoulders. "You said this was important," she said, settling into the living room chair where we'd had so many conversations over the years. "What's going on?" I took a deep breath and dove directly into the deep end. "Jennifer, I need to tell you something that's going to be difficult to hear. The local investor who made the offer on your restaurant, that's me. I'm the buyer." The silence that followed was so complete I could hear the grandfather clock ticking in the hallway. Jennifer's face went through a series of expressions: confusion, disbelief, recognition, and finally a cold fury that made my stomach clench with dread. "You," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "You're the investor." "Yes, I bought 75% of Jen's kitchen yesterday afternoon. You retain 25% ownership and the option to buy back majority control after proving you can manage the operational aspects successfully." Jennifer stood up abruptly, her hands clenched into fists at her sides. "You bought my restaurant behind my back, while I was telling you about my struggles and asking for your support. I bought it because you were telling me about struggles I knew how to solve but you wouldn't let me help with directly." "Help?" Jennifer's voice rose to a pitch that probably carried to the neighbors. "You call going behind my back and purchasing my business without my knowledge helping? I call preventing you from losing everything you've worked for helping, yes. Jennifer, you were 3 weeks away from bankruptcy. Your credit was destroyed, your reputation was in ruins, and you were about to lose not just your investment, but your confidence in your own abilities. That was my choice to make." The words exploded from her with a force that made me step backward. My business, my investment, my reputation, my choice about whether to fight or give up. "Your choice was going to destroy more than just your business," I said, fighting to keep my voice level. "It was going to destroy your marriage when Michael had to watch you lose your savings to a venture you were too proud to fix. It was going to destroy your relationship with Emma and Tyler when they had to watch their mother fail at something she was passionate about." Jennifer was pacing now, her movements sharp and agitated. "So you decided to save me from myself by taking away my agency entirely. How is that different from treating me like a child who can't be trusted to make her own decisions?" Because children make decisions based on emotion and wishful thinking. Adults make decisions based on facts and realistic assessments of their capabilities. You were making emotional decisions about a business situation that required objective analysis. Objective analysis, Jennifer repeated, and there was something dangerous in her tone. Is that what you call manipulating your own daughter? The accusation hit harder than I'd expected. I wasn't manipulating you. I was trying to save something you cared about when you couldn't save it yourself. By lying to me. By pretending to be a supportive mother while secretly negotiating to take over my business. By letting me pour my heart out about my struggles while you were planning to solve them by removing my control entirely. We stared at each other across my living room, and I could see years of careful relationship building crumbling in real time. Jennifer's face held a mixture of hurt and fury that reminded me of her father when he felt betrayed by someone he'd trusted. What happens now? She asked finally. Do I show up tomorrow morning to find out you fired me from my own restaurant? You show up tomorrow morning to find that your restaurant has new systems in place that will prevent Tuesday night from ever happening again. You'll learn how to manage inventory, schedule staff, control costs, and maintain quality standards. And when you've proven you can handle those responsibilities, you'll have the option to buy back control of a successful business instead of watching a failing one collapse. And if I refuse? If I decide I'd rather fail on my own terms than succeed under your management? I'd prepared for this question, but it still felt like swallowing glass to answer it. Then you'll have a job as head chef in a restaurant where you don't have to worry about anything except creating excellent food. But you won't have control over operational decisions because you've proven you can't handle them effectively. The words hung in the air between us like a death sentence for our relationship. Jennifer's face went through several more emotional cycles before settling into something cold and final. I need time to think about this, she said, moving toward the door. I need time to decide whether I can work with someone who would do something like this to their own daughter. Jennifer, wait. Can we at least discuss how this partnership might work? Can we talk about the operational changes that need to happen immediately? She turned back to face me from the doorway, and the expression on her face was one I'd never seen before, complete emotional distance, as if she was looking at a stranger rather than her mother. Right now, I can't discuss anything with you except the fact that you've destroyed my trust in ways I didn't know were possible. Everything else is going to have to wait until I figure out how to process what you've done. After Jennifer left, I sat in my empty house wondering if I'd just made the biggest mistake of my life. The legal documents on my kitchen table proved I now owned a restaurant, but they didn't prove I'd made the right choice. Maybe there had been another way to help Jennifer that didn't require such dramatic intervention. Maybe respecting her independence was more important than preventing her failure. But then I thought about Marcus Rivera taking his business lunches elsewhere, because he couldn't trust Jen's kitchen to provide reliable service. I thought about the customers walking out Tuesday night and the online reviews that would ensure other potential diners stayed away. I thought about Jennifer's face when she realized she'd humiliated herself in front of people whose respect she needed for her business to survive. Sometimes love required making decisions that felt like betrayal in the moment, but preserved something valuable for the future. Sometimes being a good mother meant being willing to be seen as a terrible mother if that's what it took to save what mattered most. By Friday morning, word had spread through Riverside's tight-knit business community that Jen's Kitchen had new ownership. The phone calls started early and continued throughout the day, suppliers wanting to discuss payment terms, landlords asking about lease assumptions, and other business owners curious about the change in management. But the most significant call came from Jennifer herself at 3 o'clock Friday afternoon. "I've made my decision," she said without preamble. "I'll work with you, but only under specific conditions." "What conditions?" "First, you don't interfere with my creative decisions about the menu or food preparation. Second, you don't make any major changes without discussing them with me first. Third, we keep our business relationship completely separate from our family relationship. And fourth, if this doesn't work out, you sell me back my full ownership at the original purchase price, regardless of what the business is worth at that point." The terms were fair, even generous considering the circumstances. Jennifer was essentially demanding respect for her expertise while acknowledging mine, protection for her creative autonomy while accepting operational guidance, and a clear path back to independence if our partnership proved unsuccessful. "I can agree to those conditions," I said. "When do you want to start?" "Monday morning." "And, Mom? This doesn't mean I forgive you for what you did. It just means I'm willing to see if we can build something together that neither of us could build alone." The call ended without goodbyes or expressions of affection, but it ended with agreement to move forward. Jennifer was still angry, still felt betrayed, still questioned by methods and motivations, but she was willing to work with me to save the restaurant that meant so much to both of us. Over the weekend, I prepared for what would essentially be the first day of a new business partnership with my own daughter. I developed training schedules, operational protocols, and performance metrics that would guide our working relationship. I contacted suppliers, scheduled equipment maintenance, and arranged for additional staff to ensure we could handle increased customer volume once word spread about improved service. Most importantly, I prepared myself emotionally for working closely with someone who loved me but didn't currently like me very much. Jennifer's anger was justified, her feelings of betrayal were understandable, and her demands for professional respect were completely reasonable. But beneath all those complications was the fact that we both wanted the same thing: a successful restaurant that honored her creative vision while providing sustainable income and community value. Monday morning would mark the beginning of either the most successful business partnership of my career or the most spectacular failure of my relationship with my daughter. Possibly both, but for the first time since this whole situation began, I felt cautiously optimistic that we might be able to build something together that neither of us could have achieved alone. Monday morning arrived gray and drizzly, matching my mood as I drove to Jen's kitchen for what would be our first official day as business partners. I had spent the weekend alternating between excitement about implementing necessary changes and dread about working alongside a daughter who currently viewed me as a manipulative interloper rather than a supportive partner. I arrived at the restaurant 30 minutes before our agreed meeting time, using my new keys to enter through the back door. The kitchen felt different now that I owned it, not just a space where Jennifer struggled with overwhelming challenges, but a workplace where I had both authority and responsibility to create success. The industrial equipment hummed quietly in the pre-dawn darkness, waiting for another day of service that would either mark the beginning of a turnaround or another step toward complete failure. Jennifer arrived precisely at 7 o'clock, her expression carefully neutral, and her movements deliberately professional. She wore a crisp chef's jacket and carried a leather portfolio that I'd never seen before, as if she was reporting to a job interview rather than meeting with her mother. "Good morning," she said, her tone coolly polite. I've prepared some thoughts about menu adjustments and kitchen workflow modifications. The formality felt strange after decades of casual family interactions, but I recognized it as Jennifer's way of establishing boundaries between our personal and professional relationships. If treating me like a business colleague rather than her mother helped her maintain emotional equilibrium, I was willing to adapt. "Good morning," I replied, matching her professional tone. "I've prepared some operational changes that need to be implemented immediately. Should we start with front-of-house procedures or kitchen management?" We spent the next 2 hours walking through every aspect of the restaurant's operations, identifying specific problems and developing concrete solutions. Despite the awkwardness of our new dynamic, Jennifer's intelligence and receptiveness to practical suggestions impressed me. She took detailed notes, asked thoughtful questions, and offered insights about customer preferences that would be valuable for optimizing our service approach. The real test came when we opened for lunch service. I had arranged for 2 additional staff members to work the first week while Jennifer adjusted to new procedures, and I stationed myself in a corner of the kitchen where I could observe operations without interfering unnecessarily. The transformation was immediate and dramatic. Orders flowed smoothly from the dining room to the kitchen because we had implemented a proper ticket system that prioritized timing and coordinated multiple dishes for each table. Food reached customers while it was still hot because we had established holding standards and service protocols that eliminated delays. Most importantly, Jennifer was able to focus on cooking rather than crisis management. because the systematic approach reduced chaos and improved predictability. By the end of our first lunch service, we had served 43 customers without a single complaint, return dish, or delayed order. Jennifer's face glowed with a satisfaction I hadn't seen since the restaurant's opening day, and even her carefully maintained professional distance seemed to soften slightly. "That felt completely different," she admitted as we cleaned up after the last customer had left. "I actually enjoyed cooking today, instead of just surviving it." "Systematic approaches reduce stress for everyone," I said carefully, not wanting to sound like I was lecturing. "When procedures are clear and predictable, creativity can flourish because the technical aspects become automatic." "I can see that. I'm just frustrated that it took me so long to understand what you were trying to tell me about operational management." This was the opening I'd been hoping for, a chance to address the elephant in the room without creating another confrontation. "Jennifer, experience isn't something you can download overnight. Restaurant management involves dozens of skills that take time to develop. You weren't failing because you lacked intelligence or dedication. You were struggling because you were trying to master everything simultaneously instead of building capabilities systematically." Jennifer was quiet for several minutes, wiping down surfaces that were already clean while processing what I'd said. When she finally spoke, her voice carried less hostility than I'd heard since learning about the purchase. "I still think you should have found a way to help me that didn't involve buying my business behind my back. You're probably right, but I was watching you drown and you wouldn't let me throw you a rope. Buying the restaurant was my way of building a bridge instead. A bridge that I had to cross whether I wanted to or not. A bridge that preserved options for both of us. If this partnership works, you'll eventually own a successful restaurant. If it doesn't work, you'll have learned skills that will help you succeed in your next venture." Our conversation was interrupted by a knock on the front door. Through the window, I could see Marcus Rivera holding what appeared to be a catering inquiry form. I unlocked the door to let him in, curious about what had brought him here during our closed afternoon hours. "Maggie, I heard about the ownership change," Marcus said, shaking my hand warmly before turning to Jennifer with a more cautious expression. "I was wondering if you might be interested in catering our monthly customer appreciation events. We've been looking for reliable local options." Jennifer's face lit up with professional interest. "What kind of events are you planning?" "Nothing fancy. Lunch for about 50 people, mostly sandwiches and salads, but we need everything delivered on time and set up professionally. Our previous caterer became unreliable, and we can't afford to look disorganized in front of our customers." "We can absolutely handle that," Jennifer said confidently, then glanced at me for confirmation. "The timing works well with our lunch prep schedule, and we have the equipment for off-site service." After Marcus left with details about his next event, Jennifer turned to me with something approaching genuine enthusiasm. "Catering could be a significant revenue stream. The margins are better than restaurant service, and it would help establish relationships with other business owners." "Agreed. We should develop a catering menu that showcases your strengths while using ingredients we already stock for restaurant service. Cross-utilization reduces waste and improves profitability." The next few days established a pattern that felt surprisingly sustainable. Jennifer and I would arrive early to prep and plan, work together during service hours with clearly defined roles, and debrief afterward about what was working and what needed adjustment. The artificial formality of our first day gradually relaxed into something more natural, though we both maintained careful boundaries around personal topics. More importantly, the restaurant's performance improved dramatically. Customer complaints dropped to virtually zero, service times became consistently fast, and food quality reached levels that Jennifer had achieved only sporadically during her solo management period. Word began spreading through Riverside that Jen's kitchen had undergone significant improvements, and lunch crowds grew noticeably larger each day. The real validation came Thursday afternoon, when David Chen stopped by during a lull between lunch and dinner service. "I wanted to see how things were going," he said, settling into a booth near the window. "The business community is buzzing about the changes here." "What kind of buzz?" Jennifer asked, bringing him coffee without being asked. "Positive buzz. Marcus Rivera is telling everyone that you've become his go-to spot for client lunches again. The mayor's office called asking about catering city council meetings, and I heard from 3 different people that service has improved dramatically." Jennifer beamed with pride, and I felt a surge of maternal satisfaction that had nothing to do with business ownership. My daughter was succeeding, customers were happy, and the community was recognizing the positive changes we'd implemented together. But Thursday evening brought our first serious test as business partners. We were preparing for what promised to be our busiest dinner service yet, when Jennifer discovered that our produce delivery was incomplete and significantly below quality standards. Several key ingredients for popular dinner items were either missing entirely or too wilted to serve to customers. "This is exactly the kind of crisis that used to destroy my entire evening," Jennifer said, staring at the inadequate delivery with obvious frustration. "I'd spend so much time trying to work around missing ingredients that everything else would fall behind schedule." "Different approach this time," I said, already reaching for my phone. "I'll contact our backup supplier while you modify tonight's menu to emphasize dishes that use what we have in adequate quantities." We solved the immediate problem systematically instead of panicking. Jennifer nodded and immediately began revising the evening's offerings, creating specials that would actually improve our profit margins while using available ingredients efficiently. Within 30 minutes, we had secured replacement produce from an alternative supplier and adjusted our menu to ensure every item could be prepared to our quality standards. The dinner service that followed was our best yet. Customers responded enthusiastically to the modified menu, several tables complimented the creative daily specials, and we maintained fast service despite the last-minute changes. Most importantly, Jennifer handled the unexpected crisis with confidence and systematic problem-solving, rather than the panic and improvisation that had characterized her previous approach to operational challenges. "That was actually fun," Jennifer admitted as we closed the restaurant that evening. "Instead of feeling like a victim of circumstances beyond my control, I felt like a professional chef adapting to normal industry challenges." "That's exactly the difference between reactive and proactive management," I said. "When you have systems in place, unexpected problems become puzzles to solve rather than catastrophes to survive." Friday brought an unexpected confrontation that would test both our business partnership and our evolving personal relationship. Michael Parker, Jennifer's husband, arrived at the restaurant during our afternoon prep time with an expression that immediately put me on guard. "I need to talk to both of you," he announced, his voice carrying an edge that suggested this would not be a pleasant conversation. Michael had always been supportive of Jennifer's restaurant dream, but he'd also been realistic about the financial risks involved. I suspected he had complex feelings about my intervention, probably relief that the business might now succeed, but also resentment about my methods and concern about the impact on his wife's emotional well-being. "I've been thinking about this situation all week," Michael said, taking a seat at one of the dining room tables while Jennifer and I joined him with obvious reluctance. "And I have some things to say to both of you." Jennifer tensed visibly, probably expecting criticism of her decision to work with me despite feeling betrayed by my actions. I prepared myself for a lecture about maternal boundaries and respect for adult children's independence. Instead, Michael surprised us both. "Maggie, what you did was probably the most manipulative thing I've ever witnessed within a family," he began, and my heart sank. "But it was also probably the only thing that could have saved Jennifer's business and maybe our marriage." Jennifer's eyes widened with shock. "Our marriage? Jen, you were killing yourself trying to make that restaurant work. You came home exhausted and defeated every night. You couldn't sleep because you were worrying about money and customers and staff problems. You were becoming someone I didn't recognize, and I was starting to worry that we'd lose everything important while you pursued something that was destroying your health and happiness." The admission clearly stunned Jennifer. She'd been so focused on the restaurant's operational challenges that she'd apparently missed the toll her struggles were taking on her personal relationships. "I never said anything because I didn't want to undermine your dreams," Michael continued, "but I was terrified that we were headed for financial disaster and emotional breakdown. When Maggie bought the restaurant, my first reaction was anger about her methods. But my second reaction was relief that someone with actual expertise was going to prevent the catastrophe I could see coming." Michael turned to face me directly. "I still think you should have found a way to help that didn't involve going behind Jennifer's back. But I also think you saved more than just a business. You probably saved my wife's confidence in herself and our family's financial stability." The conversation that followed was difficult but necessary. Michael expressed his concerns about family dynamics and business boundaries. Jennifer acknowledged that her pride had prevented her from accepting help that could have avoided months of struggle. I admitted that my methods had been heavy-handed, even if my motivations were protective rather than controlling. But by the end of our discussion, we had established what felt like a workable framework for moving forward. Michael would support the business partnership while maintaining clear boundaries around family time and personal relationships. Jennifer would continue learning restaurant management while preserving her creative autonomy. I would provide operational expertise while respecting both professional and personal limits. Saturday brought our biggest test yet, a dinner service that was fully booked with a waiting list for the first time since Jennifer had opened the restaurant. The buzz about our improvements had generated exactly the kind of customer demand that had previously overwhelmed our systems and destroyed service quality. But this time, we were ready. Jennifer had mastered the kitchen workflow modifications that allowed her to manage larger volumes without sacrificing quality. Our expanded staff was properly trained and scheduled to handle increased customer loads. Most importantly, we had contingency plans for the kind of unexpected challenges that had previously created cascading failures. The evening was a complete success. Every table was satisfied with their food and service. Several customers made reservations for future visits before leaving. 2 local business owners approached Jennifer about catering opportunities. And we generated the highest single-day revenue in the restaurant's history while maintaining the quality standards that would encourage repeat business. As we cleaned up after the last customer had left, Jennifer turned to me with an expression I hadn't seen since she was a child. Genuine gratitude mixed with newfound respect. "I owe you an apology," she said quietly. "Not for being angry about your methods, because I still think you should have found a different way to help, but for being too proud to accept guidance that could have prevented months of unnecessary struggle." "You don't owe me anything," I replied. "You've proven this week that you're capable of running an excellent restaurant when you have proper systems and support. My job now is to help you develop the skills to manage those systems independently." "About that," Jennifer said, pulling out the leather portfolio she'd been carrying all week, "I've been researching restaurant management courses and industry certification programs. If I'm going to eventually buy back controlling interest in this business, I want to make sure I'm genuinely qualified to handle every aspect of operations." The initiative impressed me more than any single improvement we'd made during our first week as partners. Jennifer wasn't just accepting help passively. She was actively working to develop the expertise that would make her successful long-term. Sunday brought a conversation that would define the next phase of our relationship. We met at my house to review the week's performance and plan for the coming month. But the discussion quickly moved beyond operational details to more fundamental questions about our partnership. "I've been thinking about what success looks like for both of us," Jennifer said, spreading financial reports and performance metrics across my kitchen table. "You want to see the restaurant become sustainably profitable and develop systems that don't require your constant involvement. I want to regain full ownership of a business that I'm genuinely qualified to manage independently." "Those goals are completely compatible," I agreed. "The question is how to structure the transition in a way that protects the business while giving you opportunities to demonstrate increasing competency." We spent the afternoon developing what would become our partnership roadmap. Jennifer would gradually assume responsibility for different aspects of restaurant management. First inventory and scheduling, then supplier relationships and cost control, finally financial planning and strategic development. Each new responsibility would come with specific performance targets and learning objectives. My role would evolve from hands-on operational management to consulting and oversight, providing guidance when needed, but allowing Jennifer increasing autonomy as she proved her capabilities. The ultimate goal was for me to transition to a silent partner role within 2 years, retaining ownership stake for investment protection, but leaving day-to-day management entirely to Jennifer. "This feels sustainable," Jennifer said as we reviewed our preliminary agreement. "I get to rebuild my confidence and competency gradually, instead of being thrown back into crisis management. You get to ensure the business survives and thrives instead of just hoping I figure things out through trial and error." That evening, as I prepared for bed in my quiet house, I reflected on the most intense week of my post-retirement life. 7 days earlier, Jennifer and I had been barely speaking to each other, our relationship damaged by secrets and perceived betrayals. Now we had the foundation for a business partnership that honored both her creative vision and my operational expertise. The transformation hadn't been easy or painless. Jennifer still felt hurt by my methods. and I still worried about the long-term impact of my intervention on our personal relationship. But we had proven that we could work together effectively when our roles were clearly defined and our goals were properly aligned. More importantly, we had saved something valuable that was on the verge of being lost forever. Jen's Kitchen was no longer a failing restaurant that embarrassed its owner and disappointed its customers. It was becoming a successful business that showcased Jennifer's talents while serving as a community gathering place that people actually wanted to visit. The battle for the restaurant's survival was over. Jennifer and I had emerged as unlikely but effective business partners. Now came the longer-term challenge of building something sustainable that could eventually transition back to her full control. But for the first time since this entire situation began, I felt genuinely optimistic that we were headed toward success for both the business and our relationship. Monday would bring new challenges and opportunities as we continued developing our partnership. But Sunday night I fell asleep knowing that sometimes love required taking risks that felt like betrayal in the moment, but preserved something precious for the future. Sometimes being a good mother meant being willing to be seen as a controlling mother, if that's what it took to save your daughter's dreams when she couldn't save them herself. 18 months later, I stood in the doorway of Jen's Kitchen, watching my daughter conduct a staff meeting with the kind of confident authority I had once feared she would never develop. The restaurant buzzed with the controlled energy of a well-run operation, servers preparing for lunch service while Jennifer reviewed the day's specials and addressed scheduling questions with calm efficiency. The transformation had been gradual but undeniable. What started as a desperate intervention to save a failing business had evolved into something neither of us had originally envisioned: a genuine partnership that honored both Jennifer's creative vision and the operational excellence that made sustainable success possible. "The catering order for the Chamber of Commerce luncheon goes out at 11, Jennifer was saying to her team. "Maria, you'll handle the transport and setup. Jake, I need you managing lunch prep while I'm off-site. Remember, we're representing not just ourselves but the entire downtown business community." The casual mention of representing the business community struck me as significant. Jennifer had evolved from seeing herself as an isolated entrepreneur, struggling against overwhelming challenges, to understanding her role as part of Riverside's economic ecosystem. Success had given her perspective that failure never could have provided. After the staff dispersed to their morning preparations, Jennifer approached me with the kind of easy smile that had been absent during our difficult early months as business partners. "Ready for the quarterly review?" she asked, settling into the corner booth where we now conducted our monthly business meetings. "I think you're going to be pleased with the numbers." The financial report spread across our table told a story of steady, sustainable growth. Revenue had increased 47% over the previous year, but more importantly, profit margins had stabilized at levels that supported both current operations and future expansion. Customer satisfaction scores consistently rated excellent, employee turnover had dropped to negligible levels, and our catering division had become a significant revenue stream serving clients throughout the county. But the numbers only told part of the story. The real transformation was visible in Jennifer herself. The confidence with which she handled daily operations, the strategic thinking she brought to long-term planning, and the leadership skills she developed through managing a team of 12 employees during peak seasons. "I've been thinking about expansion possibilities," Jennifer said, pointing to market analysis reports she'd prepared independently. "There's demand for a second location in Millfield, and I think we have the systems and staff depth to support growth without compromising quality." The strategic thinking impressed me as much as the operational competence. Jennifer was no longer reacting to immediate crises, but actively planning for controlled expansion based on market research and financial capacity. She had become the kind of business owner I had always hoped she could be. "What's your timeline for a second location?" I asked. 18 months. I want to complete my restaurant management certification program first, and I think we should have 2 full years of consistent profitability before taking on expansion debt. But I've identified 3 potential sites, and I've started preliminary discussions with our banker about financing options. The conversation continued for an hour, covering everything from menu development to staff training protocols for a potential second location. Jennifer's preparation was thorough, her reasoning was sound, and her enthusiasm was tempered by the kind of practical caution that prevented costly mistakes. As we wrapped up our business discussion, Jennifer pulled out a document I hadn't expected to see for another 6 months. "I want to exercise my buyback option," she said, sliding the paperwork across the table. "I know we originally planned for a 2-year timeline, but I think I'm ready to resume majority ownership." My heart raced with a mixture of pride and unexpected anxiety. This was what we'd been working toward. Jennifer demonstrating the competence to manage the restaurant independently. But actually implementing the transition felt more emotionally complex than I had anticipated. "Are you certain you're ready for full operational responsibility?" I asked. "Once you buy back majority control, the training wheels come off completely." "I'm certain. More than that, I'm excited. For the first time since opening this place, I feel genuinely confident about my ability to handle whatever challenges come up. That confidence is worth more than the financial investment required to regain ownership." The buyback transaction took 3 weeks to complete, involving business valuations, legal documentation, and financial arrangements that reflected the restaurant's dramatically improved worth. Jennifer borrowed against the business's assets and her own improved creditworthiness to purchase my majority stake, retaining me as a minority partner and occasional consultant. The day we signed the final papers, Jennifer insisted on a small celebration at the restaurant with our families and closest friends. As I watched her toast her achievement surrounded by people who had supported her through both failure and recovery, I felt a satisfaction that had nothing to do with financial returns and everything to do with seeing someone I loved become the person she was always capable of being. Michael's speech that evening captured something important about the journey we'd all taken together. 18 months ago, I thought we were watching Jennifer's dream die slowly and painfully," he said, raising his glass toward his wife. "I was wrong. We weren't watching a dream die. We were watching someone learn the difference between having a dream and having the skills to make that dream reality." Emma and Tyler, now 16 and 14, had become regular fixtures at the restaurant during after-school hours and weekend shifts. Emma had developed genuine culinary skills under Jennifer's guidance, while Tyler showed an aptitude for customer service that made him popular with regular diners. Watching them work alongside their mother, I saw the next generation learning lessons about dedication, competence, and the satisfaction that comes from building something valuable through sustained effort. The community response to our transition was overwhelmingly positive. Local business owners who had witnessed the restaurant's transformation from struggling startup to reliable community anchor offered congratulations and continued support. Marcus Rivera, whose initial skepticism had motivated some of my original concerns, became one of Jennifer's strongest advocates among the Downtown Merchant Association. "What you two accomplished together is exactly what this community needs," he told me, after learning about the ownership transition. "Jennifer learned how to run a business properly, you learned how to share expertise without taking over completely, and we all got a restaurant that makes Riverside a better place to do business." But perhaps the most meaningful recognition came from an unexpected source. 3 months after Jennifer resumed majority ownership, she received a letter from the State Restaurant Association inviting her to speak at their annual conference about successful restaurant turnarounds and family business partnerships. "They want me to share our story," Jennifer said, showing me the invitation with obvious pride. "Not just the business lessons, but the family dynamics and how we managed to work together effectively despite the complicated circumstances." The speaking engagement led to consulting opportunities as other family businesses sought guidance about managing transitions between generations and combining different types of expertise. Jennifer discovered she had a talent for helping families navigate the emotional complexities of professional partnerships, perhaps because she'd experienced firsthand how difficult but rewarding such relationships could be. My own role evolved from restaurant owner to occasional advisor and proud observer. I maintained a small financial stake in Jen's kitchen, but my involvement was limited to monthly check-ins and consultation on major decisions. Jennifer had truly become the independent business owner she'd always wanted to be, but now she had the skills and systems to make that independence sustainable. The restaurant continued thriving under Jennifer's sole management. She successfully opened the second location in Millfield, creating employment for 15 additional people, and establishing Jen's Kitchen as a recognized regional brand. Both locations maintained the quality standards and operational excellence we'd developed together, proving that the systems we'd implemented were genuinely transferable and sustainable. But perhaps more importantly, Jennifer's confidence had extended beyond business management to every aspect of her life. She joined the city council, became active in regional economic development initiatives, and started a scholarship fund for local students pursuing culinary arts education. Success in the restaurant had given her a platform for contributing to her community in ways that went far beyond serving good food. Our personal relationship had also evolved in unexpected ways. The artificial formality of our early business partnership had given way to something warmer but more respectful than our previous dynamic. Jennifer still sought my advice occasionally, but as one professional consulting another rather than a daughter depending on her mother's rescue. "I finally understand what you were trying to do," Jennifer told me during one of our monthly dinners at my house. "You weren't trying to control me or take away my independence. You were trying to preserve my opportunity to eventually become genuinely independent instead of just stubbornly autonomous." The distinction was important. Stubborn autonomy had nearly destroyed Jennifer's business and undermined her confidence. Genuine independence, built on competence and systematic thinking, had created the foundation for sustainable success and continued growth. Looking back on the entire experience, I realized that my intervention had accomplished something more valuable than saving a failing restaurant. It had demonstrated that family relationships could evolve to accommodate new roles and responsibilities without losing their essential warmth and connection. Jennifer and I had learned to be business partners, then transitioned back to being family members who respected each other's professional capabilities. The lessons extended beyond our immediate situation. Other families in Riverside began approaching us for advice about navigating generational transitions in family businesses. We developed informal mentoring relationships with several local entrepreneurs, sharing what we'd learned about combining different types of expertise while maintaining healthy personal relationships. 2 years after Jennifer resumed full ownership of Jen's Kitchen, she surprised me with a proposal that would have seemed impossible during our difficult early months as business partners. "I want you to consider becoming my partner in a consulting business," she said over coffee at the original restaurant location. "We've learned things about family business dynamics that other people need to understand. We could help families avoid some of the mistakes we made, while preserving the successes we achieved." The idea intrigued me more than I'd expected. Retirement had been pleasant, but somewhat purposeless. The opportunity to use our combined experience to help other families navigate similar challenges felt like a natural evolution of what we'd accomplished together. "What would that look like practically?" I asked. "You'd handle the business development and operational strategy components. I'd focus on family dynamics and communication issues. Together, we'd help families build sustainable partnerships that honor everyone's expertise while maintaining healthy personal relationships." The consulting business, which we named Generations Business Solutions, became unexpectedly successful. Apparently, many families struggled with similar issues. Older generations with valuable experience but outdated approaches. Younger generations with energy and innovation but limited practical skills, and everyone trying to balance love with professional respect. Our first major client was a family automotive business, where a 60-year-old father and his 35-year-old daughter were locked in constant conflict over modernization initiatives. Their dynamic was almost identical to what Jennifer and I had experienced, the older generation offering guidance that felt like interference, the younger generation asserting independence that looked like stubbornness. Working with them, we refined our approach to helping families distinguish between enabling and supporting, between independence and isolation, between tradition and inflexibility. The tools we developed proved broadly applicable to family businesses across various industries and geographic regions. But the most satisfying aspect of our consulting work was watching other families discover what Jennifer and I had learned, that combining different generations' strengths could create something more successful than either generation could achieve alone. Love and competence weren't mutually exclusive. Family relationships could include professional respect without losing personal warmth. 3 years after I first bought Jennifer's restaurant, we sat together in the expanded dining room of Jen's Kitchen's original location, surrounded by the controlled chaos of a busy dinner service. Jennifer moved through the kitchen with easy confidence, directing her staff while preparing dishes that consistently earned praise from food critics and customer reviews. "Do you ever regret how this all started?" Jennifer asked during a quiet moment between orders. Do you wish we'd found a way to work together that didn't require such dramatic intervention? I considered the question seriously, watching the efficient operation that had grown from what was once a failing business managed by an overwhelmed entrepreneur. I regret that my methods caused you pain, I said finally. But I don't regret the results. You're running a successful business that serves your community, supports your family, and showcases your talents. That wouldn't have happened if I just kept offering unwanted advice while watching you struggle. I used to think independence meant never needing help from anyone, Jennifer reflected. Now I realize that real independence means being secure enough to accept help when it improves outcomes for everyone involved. The observation captured something essential about what we'd both learned. Strength wasn't about refusing assistance. It was about integrating different types of expertise in ways that honored everyone's contributions while achieving shared goals. As the evening wound down and the last customers finished their meals, I helped Jennifer close the restaurant the way we'd done dozens of times during our business partnership. The routine felt comfortable now, two professionals who happened to be family members working together toward common objectives. Tomorrow's gonna be busy, Jennifer said as we turned off the kitchen equipment and prepared to lock up. The Millfield location is hosting that wedding reception, we have 3 catering orders going out, and the restaurant association people are coming for their site visit. The casual mention of multiple complex operations happening simultaneously reminded me how far Jennifer's management capabilities had evolved. She was no longer overwhelmed by challenges that would have paralyzed her during the restaurant's early months. Experience and systematic thinking had given her the tools to handle complexity with confidence. Walking to our cars in the parking lot behind the restaurant, I reflected on the journey that had brought us to this point. What started as a desperate intervention to save a failing business had become a story about family relationships, professional growth, and the sometimes painful process of learning to accept help in ways that strengthened rather than diminished personal autonomy. Jennifer had achieved her dream of owning a successful restaurant, but more importantly, she'd developed the skills and confidence to sustain that success independently. I had preserved something valuable for someone I loved, but I'd also learned to share expertise without overwhelming the person I was trying to help. The lessons extended far beyond restaurant management or family business dynamics. Sometimes love required taking actions that felt like betrayal in the moment, but preserved opportunities for future growth. Sometimes helping people meant refusing to enable their mistakes, while providing tools for genuine improvement. Sometimes being a good parent meant being willing to be seen as an interfering parent, if that's what it took to save something precious from preventable destruction. As I drove home through Riverside's quiet streets, past the other businesses that formed our community's economic foundation, I felt a deep satisfaction that had nothing to do with financial returns and everything to do with relationships that had grown stronger through challenge and change. Jennifer's success was ultimately her own achievement, earned through dedication and learning, and the courage to accept guidance when pride would have been easier. But I had played a role in preserving the opportunity for that success to develop, and our partnership had demonstrated that families could evolve to accommodate new dynamics without losing their essential connection. The story that began with cruel words about minding my own business had ended with a thriving business that belonged fully to my daughter, and a relationship that honored both our professional capabilities and our personal bond. Sometimes the most important gifts we give to people we love are the ones that require them to grow into the people they're capable of becoming, even when that growth process feels uncomfortable for everyone involved. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.